What is up, guys? Dzeeff here, and welcome to yet another episode of Why Nobody Remembers. If you are new to the series, basically how this works is I go over an archetype that I feel many players don't remember, and you guys write in the comment section below the last time that you thought about these cards, or if you've never heard of them at all, let me know that as well. In 2006, in Enemy of Justice, we got 3 Majestic Max monsters in one spell that is sort of related to the archetype, and in today's video I'm going to go over all 4 cards and talk about why I feel these cards were not remembered. As always, make sure to subscribe if you enjoyed today's video, and if you guys are interested in more Yu-Gi-Oh! History content, then make sure to check out my video from a couple days ago on Summoned Skull, where I talked about the entire history of the card and all of its retrains throughout the years. Anyway, the first Majestic Mech is a level 8 light fairy with 2,900 attack points and 1,800 defense. The main gimmick of these cards is that they send themselves to the graveyard during the end phase if you summon them with 1 less tribute. So, for example, this card says you can tribute summon but not set this card with 1 tribute, which is 1 less than it would normally require. If summoned this way during the end phase, send it to the graveyard. If this card attacks a defense position monster, inflict piercing battle damage to your opponent. The idea here is that you summon a big monster when your opponent might not be expecting it, and then you do a lot of damage by hopefully attacking over a low defense monster in defense position, and then during the end phase, while it does send itself to the graveyard, maybe it doesn't matter because you did a bunch of damage. You can get around the drawback here by having skill drain on the field, or perhaps bouncing this card back to your hand before the end phase happens, but realistically, especially back in 2006, those types of strategies with these cards were not nearly consistent enough to keep up with the old school metagame. That being said, I see what they were doing, and I think the next card does it a lot better. Majestic Mechaoka is by far the best Majestic Mech monster. If you've heard about any of these cards, chances are it was probably Oka. This is a level 6 light fairy. It has 2,400 attack points and 1,400 defense, and it says you can normal summon this card without tributing a monster. If you do, it is sent to the graveyard during the end phase. This one does not have piercing, but it is a pretty big deal because this one only requires 0 tributes versus 1 tribute, and that does matter in many situations. The idea with this card is that you normal summon it without tributing any monsters, so you don't lose any card advantage, and then you run over a big monster and trade with it because this thing will be sent to the graveyard during the end phase. Once again here, you could use cards like Skill Drain to get around this drawback, and maybe it's even better with this card because, yeah, if you don't have the Skill Drain, at least you're not tributing any monsters to summon it in the first place, unlike the previous level 8. That being said, the main drawback of this card, though, is that compared to a card like Cyber Dragon, why would you ever play this? What's the point of 300 more attack if the card is just going to send itself to the graveyard during the end phase? You might as well just play Cyber Dragon in many situations. It does have the slight benefit over Cyber Dragon in that you can control monsters when you summon this thing, but I think overall Cyber Dragon was the better card, especially back in the day. Perhaps one of the biggest challenges with these cards compared to other cards that you might include in a skill drain deck is that if you don't draw the skill drain, these cards are pretty much completely useless. At this point in Yu-Gi-Oh's history, Chainsaw Insect had just come out. It was released 1 set prior, and Goblin Attack Force had been released for a while, and you wouldn't really want to play these cards instead of those because those ones don't blow up in the end phase if you don't have skill drain on the field. Obviously, you'd prefer to have skill drain so that you can avoid their drawbacks, but you won't always have skill drain, and in those cases, the Majestic Mechs are way worse than either of those cards. Perhaps the worst Majestic Mech, though, is the final one. So this one is level 4, which you might be asking yourself, hey, I thought the point of these cards, of this entire archetype, is that you would summon them for 1 less tribute and then they send themselves to the graveyard in the end phase. What is a level 4 doing in this theme? And my answer is I have no idea. This card really makes no sense in the context of its theme, and yet it is still here, so of course we're going to talk about it. So this thing says, when this card inflicts battle damage to your opponent by a direct attack, draw 1 card. During the end phase of the turn this card was summoned, send it to the graveyard. It has 1000 attack and 500 defense. This card is horrible. There is no reason to ever play this card. It has no synergy with the other cards, especially if you were trying to play a Majestic Mech deck with cards like Skill Drain. Why would you ever put a 1000 attack level 4 monster in your deck? It really makes no sense. I guess the idea here is that the effect is so strong that they had to give it that drawback that sends itself to the graveyard during the end phase, but I personally don't think the effect is even good enough by itself, even if this card did not have a drawback. While it doesn't specifically mention Majestic Mech anywhere on the card, it does feature the level 4 monster, so Celestial Transformation is a quick play spell that is very related to the archetype. This card says special summon one fairy monster from your hand. That monster's attack is halved. Also, it is destroyed during the end phase. As you can probably tell here, the goal is to turn a fairy monster in your hand into a Majestic Mech, but the drawback is pretty steep. It loses half of its attack and it's destroyed during the end phase, so I can't imagine that many people using this card. That being said, this card is probably better than most of the actual Majestic Mech monsters. You could potentially do something pretty cheesy by special summoning a fairy from your hand and then using it for a big combo and not really caring if it's destroyed during the end phase. This is obviously even better nowadays with Link summoning and Synchro summoning and Xyz summoning, all things that were not around when this card was released in the TCG. I also want to mention that even though there were no more actual Majestic Mech monsters ever printed, they did get retrains in the future. So in 2008, we got a zombie version of the level 6 monster, which was pretty interesting. It has no synergy with the original Majestic Mechs, but it does maintain many of the parts that made them unique. You can normal summon this card without tributing, and once per turn during the end phase, if this card was summoned this way, send it to the graveyard, then take damage equal to its original attack in the graveyard. This card must be the only zombie monster on the field to activate and to resolve this effect. That part at the end is actually really cool. I wish the original Majestic Mechs had a similar ability where maybe if you controlled another Majestic Mech, they wouldn't actually send themselves to the graveyard in the end phase. Not a card that you would necessarily use in a Majestic Mech deck, not a very good card just in general, but it was a retrain which was pretty unexpected. Then in 2013 we got a fire version of the level 8 Majestic Mech, which was pretty cool. This one says you can tribute summon this card with one tribute, so the exact same as the original. If summoned this way during each end phase, you take 1000 damage, and this card does have piercing battle damage, which is pretty neat. This card isn't that bad. It was just released way too late. This card is not going to be very good compared to other cards in 2013, but if it would have been released in the era of the original Majestic Max, it would have probably been an okay choice. At the end of the day, all of these cards are pretty forgettable because no one was really using them in their time periods, and honestly they were outclassed in pretty much every single situation by other cards. Even if you wanted to play a skill drain deck back in the day, there were plenty of other better options. Anyway, that is all for today's video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. Make sure to let me know in the comment section below when the last time you thought about Majestic Max was, or if you've never even heard of them at all. I'll see you later. Thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.